Hello and welcome back to Unlearn with Bianca. On this podcast, we talk about everything around self-healing, personal growth, the mind-body connection, relationships, and more. Hello, friends. We're back. I took a little mini hiatus in the last few weeks, and it feels a bit weird getting back into the swing of things. I feel like when you stop something, you kind of lose a bit of momentum. So it's good to be back. I have been traveling here, there, and everywhere in the last few weeks. I have 4 weddings in the space of, I think, 6 weeks. So it is a busy season. And I also have some work commitments outside of where I live. So, I've been all over the show. And for a while there last year, I was batch recording these solo episodes, but I actually prefer speaking what is there for me in the present moment, week to week. I really like to tap into the energy of things going on, what's coming up in conversations and in my space. I feel like that's a whole lot more powerful. So that's what I'm sort of doing from here on in. But to make up for lost time, there will be a quick turnaround between the next few episodes. So come back next week, early next week, and you will see another episode live. Speaking of next week, I am on the move again. I have been invited to speak at the Women of Business conference by She Is Unleashed. I can't wait. This is going to be in Tauranga. So if you are near the area and you are a woman in business or you're thinking about stepping into business, come. It's going to be an amazing day. It's on Friday. And there's going to be an awesome panel of speakers, and I'm sure heaps of really insightful conversations to be had. I'll pop more information in the show notes for anyone who's interested in this, so you can go in and grab your tickets. Okay, so today we are talking about misconceptions around the nervous system. I want to set the record straight on a few things. And I'm very aware that when I use terms such as the nervous system regulation, all these terms that we see on social media, sometimes they come across vague. It's like you see a post or two, you sort of get a grasp of what is being talked about, but I want to break down some misconceptions that I think people assume, which are slightly inaccurate, and we need to give things a bit more context. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, why do I always go on about the nervous system? Our nervous system and how it functions is the foundation of our experience as a human. It is so important, not only in terms of our health, but also our happiness, our resilience, and how we move through life. When our nervous system operates from a healthy, regulated state, we feel more alive, we feel more resilient, we're able to move through life's ups and downs with more ease. So when I'm speaking on nervous system regulation, it's not just for people that are experiencing chronic symptoms or trauma or burnout. It's actually a concept that applies to everybody. So if you're really new to this concept or this term, the nervous system, I have done a Nervous System 101 episode. It's one of the first episodes, I think maybe episode 2 or 3 of this podcast. And this is where I really go into the basics around the nervous system, the autonomic nervous system, which it consists of the sympathetic branch, which is like our gas pedal of our system, and the parasympathetic branch, which is like the brake of our system. So here I go into some of the science around it. This is where I speak more on the different states of the nervous system. So you've probably heard of fight and flight, which is a sympathetic state where our body goes into mobilizing energy to deal with a threat. We also have a freeze response, a shutdown response, and a fawn response. And all of these are responses that our nervous system can kick into depending on how we are responding to stimuli in our environment. So if you want to go back there and listen, you'll learn a lot more about these states. There's so much I could talk into on each of these states. When I ran a workshop recently, women's nervous system regulation, I feel like I only just touched the surface. So if you guys are interested in the science, do let me know and I'll break it down further for you. Okay, so ideally, what we want to be working towards is more of a regulated nervous system state. And before I get into what that actually means, I'm going to share with you some of the signs of having a regulated state versus a non regulated or dysregulated state. So, a regulated nervous system, it usually feels like we are energized and we can rest when we need rest. We have this ability to express emotions freely. We often feel at ease, we feel safe, we feel connected and present in life. Now, this can differ from person to person, but generally speaking, it is when our health is stable, our digestion is good, our energy is good, our thinking is clear. They are all common signs of a regulated system. Now, if your nervous system has been operating in a state of dysregulation, you might feel constantly anxious or overwhelmed or stuck in this loop of overthinking or overanalyzing. Likely you will be struggling with some fatigue or brain fog or digestive issues or chronic pain and many other symptoms there. You might have trouble asserting your needs, setting boundaries, or the opposite. You feel emotionally reactive to other people around you and irritable. And there's also things like hormonal imbalances, sleep problems, weight gain, muscle tension, difficulty focusing, like all of these things that actually can be quite common. If I'm reflecting on my own life, I spent a lot of time, especially up until the point that I got well from chronic pain, living with a dysregulated nervous system. And for me, there were other symptoms like heat rashes, irritable bowel syndrome. I remember like I'd drink a glass of wine and my whole chest would come out in a rash. I was always getting sick, colds, flus, tonsillitis, not sleeping. All of these things can be the result of a dysregulated nervous system, which we're going to talk about. Now, the first misconception that I want to speak on is that when people assume that a regulated nervous system means that you're always calm, as if we are looking to reach this permanent Zen like state, like the term regulation gets associated with calm. And I can see how this happens, and I'll explain why in a minute. But this is actually inaccurate. So, a regulated nervous system does not equal a calm nervous system all of the time. Okay. So, in reality, our nervous system is not designed to stay in one state forever. If you were calm 24/7, you would not be able to react to danger. You wouldn't be able to focus. You wouldn't be able to work. You wouldn't even have enough energy to get motivated. If you were always in this rest and digest or parasympathetic state, like really cruisy, really calm, at ease, you would actually struggle to take action. So we need both activation, like getting the gas pedal moving, pumping the gas pedal up, and relaxation, which is putting on the brakes just at the right time. So I mentioned before we've got the fight response, the flight response, the freeze response, and shutdown response. These are all responses that occur within our physiology and our body. None of them are actually bad states. Some of them aren't so useful at certain points, but they are survival mechanisms. So, a healthy nervous system, a regulated system, is one where we can move through these different states fluidly. So, I'm thinking in my mind like a dial. We want to turn it up and down rather than a switch, which is on and off. If you think about an athlete before a big race, their heart rate increases, their muscles activate, their focus sharpens. This is the fight or flight response, which is really necessary for peak performance. But after their race, they're likely going to be cooling down, stretching, and returning to this relaxed state. So they are moving between fight or flight and rest and digest, parasympathetic. They're giving their body an opportunity to recover. It's the same with parenting. Like, if your child is in a really sticky situation, the parent is likely, out of instinct, going to react quickly when their child is in danger. But they're not going to stay in that panic mode forever. It's about activating and then having tools to return back into a balanced state. Now, the reason why most people just associate that term nervous system regulation with the word calm is because we live in this day and age, we live in this world where a lot of people's nervous systems are stuck in a state of fight or flight or freeze. So they're stuck in this activation response, meaning their systems are constantly responding as if there's a threat, and they're not spending enough time signaling safety or getting into that rest and digest state, that state of ease, of connection, of calmness. So it is partly true because for the most part, we do need to practice down regulating, slowing down, but it's really contextual. And like I said, the fight or flight response isn't a bad thing. That's not actually the issue. The issue is when we get stuck responding like everything's a threat and we give ourselves no time to come back into a rested state. When that happens, that is what we call a dysregulated nervous system. And it can happen from our fast-paced lifestyles, work pressure, digital overload, high-pressure jobs, financial instability, relationship issues. Over a long period of time, that can have an impact on our nervous system. It can happen from past trauma. If your body learned to stay in fight or flight as a survival response when you were younger, it takes some time to shift out of that. It can happen from lack of self-care. All of these things can keep our nervous system in a heightened state. The thing that I really want to get across is that nervous system dysregulation is not something you're born with. It's not a black and white thing. It's a learned, over time, conditioned response. The way that your system is responding to stimuli. It's like the alarm system gets switched on and it's stuck on. That's the way I like to describe it. So some of you may remember from high school or uni, I think I studied this at uni, this example. There was a study, Pavlov's conditioning, and it was a study done around salivation in dogs as a part of research on digestion. So he noticed that dogs would start salivating whenever they saw the lab assistants or even heard footsteps of the assistants, even if no food was present. And this really sparked his curiosity about why the dogs were automatically salivating around the assistants. They had these automatic responses. I'm going to be sharing this and relating this back to the nervous system, so stay with me. So he set up an experiment where he would present food and measure how much the dogs were salivating. Food naturally makes dogs salivate, right? So their response was automatic. And around the same time, Pavlov also introduced a neutral stimulus, which was a bell. So he rang the bell just before giving the dogs the food. And initially, it didn't trigger any salivation in the dogs. He did this pairing, though, of the bell and the food repetitively over time. And every time he rang the bell, the food was given. Over time, this is the interesting bit, the dogs began to associate the sound of the bell with their food. So after this was repeated for a while, the dogs actually began to salivate in response to the bell alone, even when there was no food. So the bell had become the conditioned stimulus that triggered the salivation, the conditioned response. So you can see how things become, I'd say, unconscious, repetitive, until it's just a automated response. And I was thinking about this analogy. I hope I've explained it well enough for you guys. If not, then go check it out. I was thinking of this analogy, how it really reminds me of the way the nervous system becomes dysregulated, because our nervous system learns from past experiences and also creates automatic responses. Just like Pavlov's dogs learn to salivate at the bell, our nervous systems learn to react to stress cues even when no stressor is there. It responds to as if there's a threat, even when there's no threat that is there anymore. So, for example, if someone grew up in a chaotic home, their nervous system learns to associate, this is just an example, loud voices with danger. Even if the voice now belongs to a safe person, the body can react automatically, just like the salivation, and go into a fight or flight response. Another example might be work-related stress. Imagine you've had a stressful job for years where the deadlines are tight, expectations are high, and you're always on the go. You just don't stop. Your body might start to associate certain work related cues with stress. So, like the sound of an email notification could actually just, that alone could send your body into a fight or flight response. You might notice your heart rate increases or your body tenses up. Another example could be if every time you spoke up, you were shut down when you were younger, your body automatically might start to associate self expression with danger. And that's when, again, we get into this freeze response because it feels difficult to speak. It feels difficult to voice our opinions. So, I said it's not always about being calm. In this case, we'd actually want to retrain the nervous system to be more activated, to be able to speak up, to be able to move, to be able to vocalize. So it's not always about being calm. Finally, I'll give you an example of chronic pain. So if you've been dealing with chronic pain over a period of months or years, the brain and nervous system become conditioned to associate certain activities or movements or even thoughts of a possibility of pain with a pain response. So you could be thinking about the day ahead and how it's going to be really difficult to get through with that back pain. And that in itself can set off a stress response. It can set off that fight or flight response because of the anticipation of pain. Or there might be a specific movement or posture that you're thinking about that triggers fear, like bending down or reaching for something. It also signals a cascade of stress hormones because your brain and your nervous system have learned to associate those actions with pain. So it's all about how our brain and nervous system have become conditioned over time to respond as if there's a threat. So to circle back to that initial misconception, nervous system regulation is not about being calm. It's about having the skills and the tools to reteach our nervous system and our brain how to respond appropriately to a certain stimuli or a certain experience. And we can do this, it just takes time and it takes practice. So, the second misconception that I want to speak on is when people assume that to practice nervous system regulation, it's just about moving the body or body based practices, or it's just about the brain and the mind, as if we split the two and have one or the other. And that is just not true. It needs to be a whole holistic approach. A lot of people think that nervous system work is only about doing breath work or cold plunges or somatic body based practices and shaking and that kind of thing. And I think that's great, but it's not the full picture. Other people might just think it's about getting certain supplements and having a really healthy diet and moving your body. And that is also great. It's not the full picture. On the flip side, if you are just changing your thoughts and doing mindset work or doing affirmations, that's also going to have a positive impact, but it's not the full picture. So it's a blend. So it's taking responsibility and looking at what's going on mentally and in our mind and our belief systems. It's also looking at ways we can signal safety back into our body. And it's looking at our general foundations and our environment. I think if you're new to these concepts, the best place to start is just to keep it simple, like actually looking at how you are caring for yourself. These are the foundations of a healthy nervous system. So, are you getting enough sunlight? Are you moving daily? Doesn't matter how you're moving, but are you moving? Are you having a good diet? Are you getting your B vitamins, your vitamin D? Are you getting good connections? When was the last time you had a really great conversation with a friend or you did an activity with someone? These are all core foundational things for a healthy nervous system because they help reduce chronic inflammation. And another thing that's also really important that I need to add on the foundational piece is beginning to practice self-compassion. So beginning to really think about how we are talking to ourselves and are we doing that in a loving, kind way? Because we can all work on that. So once you've got some of those core foundation pieces locked in and because they're like the ultimate way of signaling safety to your body, eating enough, moving, good connections, all those sorts of things. Then we can look at other things. Then we can look at practices you can do in the body and practices that you can do in the mind to deal with emotional patterns and cognitive patterns. Now, the reason I say it's important to do both, you can do the physical practices like breath work, like grounding, like shaking. All of these things are really, really great. But if you're still holding on to these deep seated beliefs like, I'm never safe, or I must constantly be on, I must constantly be working, you're going to be working against yourself because these beliefs drive you to do more and you can end up overworking, never resting, and then getting into that fight or flight response again. I'll give you an example of this actually that's coming to mind. So I remember in London, I remember one Saturday morning, I got up really early to go to the markets, and everyone in the flat was in their pajamas, in their dressing gowns at about 11 a.m. And I just remember having these thoughts of like, what are you doing? You're missing out on your whole day. Like, are you going to waste the day like that? And I had this conversation with someone. We were talking about different ways that we've been raised. And I was just saying how, like, in my household, like, my dad always used to say, what are you doing if you're not up and at 'em by like 8 a.m.? You're not seizing the day. It's, just you got to be doing something. And I didn't realize until that point how ingrained that belief had become. I was actually unconscious of it. Sometimes they're just sneaky beliefs. I didn't actually realize and have the awareness of different expectations I had put on myself and others. So once I started to look at that, once I started to think about where this was from, if it was serving me, how this belief was actually driving actions in my life, I realized that I didn't allow myself to sleep in a lot. I didn't allow myself to rest. I had certain beliefs and thoughts around that. And it took me starting to question that, starting to change those thoughts so that I could shift my actions and therefore show up differently. So these subconscious beliefs drive our thoughts and actions. If you're doing the breath work and you're working out and you're taking all the supplements, but you have this deep-seated belief from childhood that you have to be perfect to be accepted, then that keeps the system in a stress response, probably a freeze response. If you have this belief around, if I slow down, I'm going to fall behind, then you're going to get stuck responding constantly in a fight or flight response because you're trying to keep up. So the belief work, unpicking beliefs, looking at our thoughts, looking at our choices, that is really important for nervous system regulation. A belief that I see that often that comes up in women, and it's often subconscious, meaning that they're often not aware of it, is thinking that and acting as if they're not allowed to take up space. And this results in people pleasing and fawning responses, meaning we're catering to other people's needs and dimming our own light, which again can keep the nervous system in a freeze response, a fawning response. If you were taught that growing up emotions are bad or emotions are too much, then naturally over time you're going to press emotions down and suppress them. So you can do all the physical things, but if you're not allowing yourself to get angry, if you're not allowing yourself to get upset, then it's taking a lot of energy to hold all of that in. So, point I'm getting at here, if you haven't guessed already, is that we want to be doing the physical stuff. Breath work is so powerful. Learning how to breathe efficiently is powerful. Shaking, grounding, polyvagal exercises, all of these things are crucial. But also looking at our thoughts, our beliefs, our patterns is just as important. It's the same with if we do mindset work, like affirmations or positive thinking. If our body's still stuck in chronic tension and we're holding so tight and we're bracing ourselves and we're in this hypervigilant state, and then we're just saying, yeah, I'm fine, I'm okay to be calm, I feel really calm, we know that your body is not showing that. There's no congruence between what you're saying and how your body appears. So it works both ways. Both are as important as each other. The third misconception that I want to speak on is that male and female nervous systems are the same in the way that they respond and what they need for regulation. While everybody has some fundamental similarities in the way their nervous system functions, there are differences in biology, hormonal patterns, evolutionary differences that mean approaching nervous system regulation in the same way for both sexes may not always be effective. So I've always found it really interesting that women have greater sensitivity to oxytocin, meaning that they experience more effective stress relief when engaging in bonding activities like physical touch, emotional connection, or nurturing behaviors. Oxytocin is really important in women's nervous systems to help activate that rest and digest state. There's also new research that shows that heart rate variability is the variation in time between heartbeats. So we want a higher heart rate variability, which shows that there's more nervous system resilience. This changes depending on where women are at on their cycle and their life phase, which is really interesting because the fluctuation of heart rate variability in women throughout their menstrual cycle is very distinct in comparison to men whose heart rate variability tends to remain quite stable throughout the month due to them not having as many hormonal fluctuations. So I spoke on this in my recent workshop and how it's really changed the way that I look at what I give my body during different seasons and different parts of my cycle. This is all to do with our hormones, but we actually have more nervous system resilience and a higher heart rate variability during our follicular, if you're a woman listening, during your follicular phase, so after menstruating, right up until ovulation. And that is when we have more resilience. Our body can respond to stress better. We can take more action. It's also where biologically we have more capacity and more resilience to deal with more challenging situations and move from a more fight or flight or freeze response back into parasympathetic or rest and digest. And I think that's just really important because it's important to note this difference between male physiology and neurobiology or the way the brain works versus females because there hasn't been a lot of funding until more recently around women's health. So if we know that through certain periods, through certain changes in life, menopause, perimenopause, we can expect to see changes in our physiology and our state and our capacity to deal with certain stresses, then it just helps us practice more compassion and understand ourselves better than trying this one size fits all regime. And that's not to say that I don't believe in routines and I don't believe in consistency and discipline. I absolutely do. But I think that we need to find what works for us and our own system and our unique biology. And I think that can be really important. For me, it means that at certain parts of the month, I will shift my routines. I will be a lot more compassionate with myself. I will lower my exercise. I will change what I'm eating. And I've only learned to do that by starting to be more informed about my nervous system and starting to really tune in with my own body's needs. And on top of that, there is societal conditioning that both males and females are working against in different areas, which we also need to take into account in terms of how our nervous system responds and what we need. Because I notice a lot of women, and this is why I created Self-Sourced, get stuck in a freeze response and actually need to learn to bring in some more sympathetic energy, meaning more activation, more speaking up, ways that they can express themselves during some circumstances. So again, it comes back to it's not always about being calm. It's about looking at our individual patterns. And the last misconception I want to speak on when it comes to nervous system regulation and nervous system health is that it is this thing that we want to achieve, this destination we want to get to. Just like you wouldn't go to the gym once and continue to be fit forever, it's the same with retraining our nervous system and retraining our brain. It's not a one time thing. Our nervous system learns through repetition. We are literally rewiring responses and patterns over time, whether that be by taking a mind or mental approach or doing physical things that make us feel safe in our body. It's about consistency. It's not about perfection. It's a practice, not a destination. So, as you start to do this nervous system work and find ways to regulate your nervous system, and this is the work I do in the lightning process and in self sourced, over time, you will have more moments where you start to feel amazing, where your health is really good, where you feel like you have energy, you feel regulated, you feel like you've got clear thinking, your relationships are good, you feel calm, you feel connected, you're able to speak your needs, and you're just flowing through life. That will happen. And then there'll also be moments amongst that where, maybe your health takes a dip, maybe you feel more irritable, maybe life comes up and you are getting triggered. And that's okay. That is just part of it. If I think about I've known about these concepts for about 10 years now, understanding the nervous system, understanding the brain has changed my life dramatically. I recovered from chronic illness. I am a lot more in touch with my own needs and my own choices. There's so many different things. That doesn't mean I don't have my days. It doesn't mean I feel activated or I go into freeze responses and procrastination. It just means that I have more tools to get myself out of those states faster. So I want to remind you, it's not a one and done thing. It's about being curious, about learning about your own needs and what your body needs. And I think this is just, the foundation, self-compassion. I think this is something that's just so important to remember, because perfection, always trying to do things perfectly, that in itself creates more stress. And I don't know about you, but I don't have time for that. Okay, I hope you guys got something from this episode. There are many more things I could speak on when it comes to the nervous system. So please send me in specific questions. It does not have to be chronic illness related. It might just be going through practices. Maybe you want to learn more about each state and response in the nervous system. Just let me know what you would like to hear more about. In terms of offerings at the moment, I'm taking clients for the lightning process from April onwards, and my self-source group kicks off next week. So there's still time if you're interested in that, and you can find all of the information on my website or in the link in the show notes. I hope you guys have a fabulous weekend, because I know I'm getting this episode out on a Friday. And thank you for taking the time again to prioritize yourself, to tune in, to listen, to learn. And I'll see you next week.